So in terms of trying to achieve this, this motivational interviewing approach and to help evoke from people arguments for change and ultimately for them to change, we do so with a background of what they call the MI spirit, the motivational interviewing spirit. This is kind of not so much what we do, but the qualities that we take to the interaction and the way that we are with people, you know, as a kind of a sort of a background or fundamental to the approach. And there's three main things that relate to the motivational interviewing spirit. The first is collaboration. So rather than creating a hierarchical kind of relationship where the clinician is sort of the expert and the client is there to be sort of told what to do, we want to have a collaborative relationship where both parties really are working together on the problem. There's this sort of collaboration, working together and creating goals and solutions together rather than being told. The second element of the MI spirit is evocation. So that's that notion that we've alluded to before, whereby we're really wanting to sort of inspire or draw forth or elicit motivation from the person. Persuasion isn't effective at resolving ambivalence. Persuasion entrenches a person against change. What we're wanting to do is we're wanting to use that evocation, drawing or inspiring or eliciting motivation from the person themselves. And thirdly, the third element of the motivational interviewing spirit is respect, is coming from a point of view of respecting people's choice, people's responsibility to make choices, people's resources to be able to follow through with those choices, and ultimately respecting whether or not they change. That often is kind of, for us as clinicians, that's often a very challenging thing to do, to be able to respect that a person may choose not to change. But by being able to respect that choice and really sort of being able to leave it largely up to the person to make that choice, it actually makes it more likely that they will choose to make certain changes in their lives. So the motivational interviewing spirit is about being collaborative, being evocative, and being respectful. And it's very interesting because even at that level, even if you know, we simply work with our clients or patients within that motivational interviewing spirit, that in and of itself is predictive of change. Those three bits in and of themselves make it more likely that people will make changes to their health behaviours. And it's interesting to consider what isn't within the motivational interviewing spirit. And of course, you know, some things perhaps are more obvious than others, like, for example, confrontation. Being confrontational or challenging the person and their perspective, or sort of overriding the client or patient's perspective as if it's somehow impaired or wrong. That probably doesn't fit with the motivational interviewing spirit. It's also interesting to consider education, and education is something that we as clinicians do a lot of. We provide education and information and advice, and that's very appropriate. Probably what's most important is to think about how that's done. If we're giving education or information in a way that simply assumes that the client themselves, you know, just lacks the knowledge or doesn't have the insights, and we're kind of imparting that onto them, then that probably doesn't fit with the motivational interviewing spirit. But there are ways that we can do education or advice giving, which we'll talk about towards the end, which makes that still fit within that collaborative, evocative and respectful kind of a spirit. And then authority. One of the traps I think that we can fall into sometimes as clinicians is known as the expert trap, where we are kind of the expert and we start to tell the client or the patient what they should do. Telling them what they should do you know, often can evoke resistance. Not always. Sometimes you know, direct and clear advice is quite important and motivational. We just have to watch that expert trap where we start to sort of fall into the trap of telling people what to do. So we have this, first of all, this MI spirit, this motivational interviewing spirit, where we try to be collaborative, evocative and respectful and avoid some of the confrontation, some of the expert trap and those sorts of things. And then there's a few key things that we have in the back of our mind that we're trying to achieve as we go along with people. 4 general principles, I guess, of things that we're trying to do as we go along. The first is to express empathy. So I mentioned that a little bit before. That's that notion of really trying to use the Rogerian skill of reflective listening, of being able to show empathy and understanding for the person's perspective, and thereby helping them to explore their ambivalence. Secondly, we're trying to develop discrepancies. One of the things that seems to be quite motivational for people is when they start to consider how certain behaviours fit with who they want to be. And if there's a misfit there, if there's a discrepancy between certain behaviours and the person that they want to be, then that can help get them over the line for change. For example, a person who might be drinking might start to think, well, spending all that time in the pub doesn't fit with the kind of father I want to be, because it means I'm not at home as much as I'd like. So that would be an example of developing a discrepancy that helps to start to get the person thinking about their behaviour. The third general principle, or the third thing that we have in the back of our minds that we're trying to do throughout a motivational interview, is what they call rolling with resistance. Remember before we were saying that resistance actually can predict a less likelihood of change. The more resistant a client is being with us, the less likely they might change. So we're really wanting to try to roll with resistance, and that means not kind of argue against it or fight against it or butt up against it, but instead, if we hear something resistant from our clients, something against change, then we sort of roll with that. We might reflect it or kind of listen to it or validate it. We don't argue against it. Arguing against resistance just elicits more resistance. And the fourth general principle, I guess, the thing that we have in the back of our minds to be trying to achieve with clients, is supporting self-efficacy. People are less likely to make changes if they don't believe they can. If they don't believe they're able to do so, then they're much less likely to actually get over the line with change. So all the time we're looking for opportunities to support self-efficacy, build confidence, build hope, and those sorts of things. So on top of this MI spirit that we've talked about, we try to have in the back of our minds these 4 things, which are trying to express empathy, being empathic about the person and their position, developing discrepancies between certain behaviours or health behaviours and who they want to be, avoiding arguing with the person and rolling with resistance, and supporting self-efficacy.